I'm Marcus Johnson, 34, a struggling single dad living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped two-bedroom apartment with my twin daughters. For 3 years, my ex-wife's family had made it their mission to remind me how I'd failed them, how my modest home was embarrassing, and how I could barely provide for Emma and Sophie. At last month's custody hearing, my former mother-in-law actually laughed when she saw my address, telling the mediator that children deserved proper homes, not closets. Her words cut deep, but what she didn't know was that I'd been quietly building something extraordinary. The late nights, the side projects, the sacrifices, they were all leading to this moment. In 72 hours, I would hand my daughters keys to a 6-bedroom mansion with a pool, theater room, and their own art studio. The same woman who mocked my tiny apartment would soon discover that underestimating a father's love was the biggest mistake she'd ever made. I still remember the day Sarah's mother first stepped into my apartment. It was 6 months after the divorce, and I'd just signed the lease on this place, a cramped 2-bedroom in an older building that I could actually afford on my single income. The walls were thin, the kitchen barely fit one person, and the living room doubled as my home office. But it was ours, mine and the girls, and I was proud that I could provide a roof over their heads. Patricia Williams. She'd kept her maiden name after her own divorce, as if it carried more prestige than her ex-husband's surname, stood in my doorway like she was entering a crime scene. Her Louboutin heels clicked against the worn linoleum as she surveyed my humble domain with the same expression most people reserve for roadkill. "This is where my granddaughters sleep?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain as she peered into the girls' bedroom. I'd spent weeks transforming that space, painting murals on the walls, building custom storage solutions to maximize every square foot. Emma and Sophie had bunk beds that I'd assembled myself, complete with fairy lights and reading nooks. To me, it looked magical. To Patricia, it apparently looked like child abuse. "They love it here," I said, trying not to let the defensiveness creep into my voice. "We've made it work for us." She turned to examine my lease agreement, which I'd foolishly left on the kitchen counter. 200 square feet per person. I'd calculated it myself, thinking it wasn't too bad for the city. Patricia's own house had more space in her walk-in closet. "Marcus," she said, my name sounding like something distasteful she needed to spit out. "These children deserve better than this. They're used to proper living standards. Space to breathe, rooms of their own." She gestured at my makeshift office corner, where my desktop computer shared space with the girls' art supplies. "This isn't sustainable." What she didn't see were the little things that made this place home. The height marks on the bathroom doorframe, where I measured the twins every month, the family photos covering the refrigerator, the cozy reading corner where we spent every evening, all three of us squeezed onto one small couch, taking turns reading chapters aloud. She didn't see love. She only saw square footage. Sarah and I met in college. Two kids from completely different worlds who somehow found each other in advanced calculus. She was brilliant, funny, and refreshingly down-to-earth, despite coming from money. Her family owned a chain of luxury hotels across the West Coast, but Sarah wanted to be a teacher. She loved children, dreamed of making a difference in young lives, and saw beauty in simple things. I fell in love with her laugh first, this genuine sound that she'd make when I'd crack terrible math jokes during our study sessions. We'd spend hours in the library, her golden hair catching the afternoon light as she helped me understand differential equations, and I'd help her see the elegant patterns hidden in complex problems. For 7 years, we built something beautiful. Together. Sarah taught 4th grade while I worked my way up from junior developer to senior software engineer. We lived in a modest apartment, saved for vacations, and talked about the future we'd build together. When the twins came along, our world became perfect in its beautiful chaos. But success has a way of changing people, or maybe it just reveals who they really were underneath. Sarah's father offered me a position at his company's tech division 3 years ago. The salary was triple what I was making, complete with stock options and a corner office. I turned it down. I knew it came with strings, expectations, obligations, and ultimately, control over our lives that I wasn't willing to surrender. I wanted to build something of my own, to provide for my family through my own efforts and talents. That decision marked the beginning of the end. "You're holding us back," Sarah said one evening, her voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. "Dad's offering you everything, and you're too proud to take it." "I'm not too proud," I replied. "I'm too smart. Your father doesn't give gifts, he makes investments. And I'm not interested in being owned." The divorce papers arrived 2 months later. Sarah had changed, influenced by months of her family's whispered poison about my lack of ambition and inability to provide properly for their granddaughters. The settlement was brutal, but I kept my savings. She kept the house we'd bought together, and we'd share custody of Emma and Sophie. What I didn't expect was how the custody arrangements would become a weapon. Every pickup and drop-off became an opportunity for Patricia to comment on my inadequate lifestyle. Every school event turned into a comparison between what I could provide versus what Sarah's family offered. They were setting the stage for something bigger, building a case that would eventually paint me as the father who loved his children but simply couldn't give them what they needed. The divorce papers were just the beginning. The business registration, certificate for Johnson Digital Solutions, arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday morning. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I held that simple piece of paper in my hands and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. During my marriage, I'd been the reliable employee, the steady paycheck, the safe choice, but I'd always harbored bigger dreams. Late at night, after Sarah was asleep, I'd work on side projects, small websites for local businesses, mobile apps that solved everyday problems. Nothing major, just enough to keep my entrepreneurial spirit alive while maintaining the stability my family needed. The divorce changed everything. Suddenly, stability wasn't enough. I needed to prove I could provide more than just adequacy for my daughters. I needed to build something that would secure their future and silence the critics, who saw me as nothing more than a struggling single dad. My first real client came through a former colleague. Techstart Industries needed someone to rebuild their entire customer management system, and they needed it done quickly and quietly. The project was complex, integrating legacy systems with modern cloud infrastructure while maintaining security protocols that would satisfy their enterprise clients. I spent 3 months working 18-hour days. My routine became mechanical: wake up at 5 a.m., work on the Techstart project until 7, get the girls ready for school, head to my day job, work until 6, pick up Emma and Sophie, make dinner, help with homework, read bedtime stories, and then code. Until 2 a.m., sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. The girls noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the way I'd sometimes fall asleep reading to them. "Daddy, are you sick?" Sophie asked one evening, her small hand pressed against my forehead to check for fever. "No, sweetheart," I said, pulling her closer. "Daddy's just working on something special, something that's going to make everything better for us." Emma, always the more perceptive twin, studied my face with serious 8-year-old eyes. "Is it a surprise? The biggest surprise ever?" I promised, and for the first time in months, I felt certain it was true. The Techstart system launched without a single bug. Their customer satisfaction scores increased by 40% in the first month, and their operational efficiency improved so dramatically that they offered me a full-time position as their CTO instead. I negotiated a retainer agreement that would pay me twice my current salary for 20 hours of consultation per week. That's when I knew I was onto something big. Other companies started calling. Word spread through the tech community about the developer who could solve impossible problems with elegant solutions. My business registration certificate had been just a piece of paper. Now it was becoming the foundation of something extraordinary. But I kept it all secret. Sarah's family had made it clear they were watching, waiting for me to fail. Let them watch, I thought. They'd never see me coming. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was debugging code at my day job. Rachel Morrison from Quantum Dynamics Corporation, a name that made even seasoned tech professionals pause with respect. They were the invisible giant behind half the cloud infrastructure powering Fortune 500 companies, and they had a problem that threatened to cost them millions. "Mr. Johnson?" Rachel's voice was crisp, professional, with an underlying note of desperation. "We've heard about your work with Techstart Industries. We need to discuss a project that requires your specific expertise." The meeting was set for Saturday morning at their downtown headquarters. I arranged for Sarah to take the girls early that weekend, telling her I had some consulting work to catch up on. If she suspected anything more significant, she didn't. Let on Quantum Dynamics lobby was intimidating, all glass and steel, with awards and recognition plaques covering an entire wall. Rachel met me personally, which I later learned was unusual for someone at her level. As Senior Vice President of Technology Implementation, she typically delegated initial contractor meetings to junior staff. "We have a situation," she began. As soon as we sat down in the 20th floor conference room, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled beneath us, and I couldn't help but think about my tiny apartment somewhere in that urban maze. The problem was elegant in its complexity. Quantum Dynamics had acquired 3 smaller companies over the past year, each with their own proprietary systems, security protocols, and data architectures. The integration was supposed to be straightforward, but the systems were rejecting each other like mismatched organ transplants. Their internal team had spent 8 months trying to solve it. External consultants from major firms had failed. The deadline was 6 weeks away, and failure would mean losing their biggest client, a contract worth $200 million annually. "Why me?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You could hire entire teams from top consulting firms." Rachel smiled for the first time since we'd met. "Because sometimes the biggest problems require the simplest solutions, and sometimes the simplest solutions come from people who aren't constrained by conventional thinking." The contract terms were staggering. $1.2 million for successful integration, with performance bonuses that could push the total to $1.8 million. Completion within 5 weeks. Complete confidentiality until the project was finished. And if I succeeded, Quantum Dynamics wanted first rights to any future consulting work. I signed the contract that afternoon. For the next 5 weeks, I became a ghost. I told my day job I was taking accumulated vacation time to deal with family matters, which wasn't entirely untrue. Since this was absolutely about my family's future, I arranged for extended childcare on my custody days, spinning elaborate stories about job interviews and training sessions. The girls knew something was different. Emma found me asleep at my desk one morning, surrounded by flowcharts and system diagrams that looked like abstract art to her 8-year-old eyes. "Daddy, are you building something?" she asked, tracing her finger along one of the network topology drawings. "Something amazing, sweetheart," I said, pulling her onto my lap. "Something that's going to change everything for us." The solution, when it finally came to me, was beautifully simple. Instead of trying to force 3 incompatible systems to communicate directly, I created a universal translator middleware layer that could interpret and convert data between any of the architectures. It was like teaching 3 people who spoke different languages to all speak through one perfectly. Multilingual interpreter. The system went live on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, quantum dynamics efficiency metrics had improved by 60%. By the following week, they were processing data faster than they ever had before. The $200 million client not only renewed their contract but expanded it. Rachel called me into her office the day after the final performance tests. The bonus check was larger than my entire annual salary had been just 2 months earlier. As I held that piece of paper, I realized everything was about to change. Sarah's family thought they knew who I was, a struggling single dad who could barely afford his tiny apartment. They had no idea they'd been watching a sleeping giant. The first mansion I toured was ridiculous: 12 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, and a wine cellar that cost more than most people's houses. Rebecca Santos, my real estate agent, had initially been skeptical when I contacted her about luxury properties. My current address and modest appearance didn't exactly scream millionaire homebuyer, but my pre-approval letter from the bank changed her tune quickly. "I'm looking for something special," I told her as we walked through the marble-floored foyer of the third property that day. "Something that says home rather than museum. My daughters are 8, they need space to be kids." Rebecca nodded, making notes on her tablet. "Children change everything, don't they? Let me show you something that might be perfect." The house she found was in Willowbrook Estates, a gated community 30 minutes from the city. As we drove through the entrance, past the guardhouse and perfectly manicured lawns, I felt like I was entering a different world. The neighborhood was the kind of place where children rode bikes on tree-lined streets, and neighbors actually knew each other's names. "This one just came on the market," Rebecca said as we pulled into the circular driveway. "The owners are relocating to Europe. They're motivated to sell quickly." The house was beautiful without being ostentatious. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a 3-car garage, and a backyard that looked like a park. There was a swimming pool with a safety fence, a gazebo perfect for summer barbecues, and mature oak trees that provided natural playground equipment. But what sold me was the 3rd-floor room that the previous owners had used as an art studio. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the space with natural light, and built-in shelving lined the walls. I could already picture Emma and Sophie up there, paintbrushes in hand, creating the masterpieces they'd been dreaming about. "The asking price is $2.8 million, Rebecca said, watching my face carefully for any sign of sticker shock. "I'll take it," I said simply. "Cash offer, no contingencies, close in 2 weeks." Rebecca's pen stopped moving. "I'm sorry, did you say cash? Is that a problem?" "Mr. Johnson, most people don't casually offer nearly $3 million in cash for a house. Are you sure you don't want to have it inspected first? Maybe bring your wife to see it." "I'm divorced," I said, walking to the master bedroom's window that overlooked the backyard, "and I'm sure this is the one." What I didn't tell Rebecca was that I'd been planning this moment for months. I'd driven through dozens of neighborhoods, researched school districts, and memorized property tax rates. I knew exactly what I wanted: a place where my daughters could grow up safely, where they'd have room to explore their interests, and where Sarah's family could never again question my ability to provide. The hardest part was keeping it secret from Emma and Sophie. During our next weekend together, I drove them past the house, spinning it as a Sunday drive to see pretty neighborhoods. "Daddy, look at that house." Sophie pressed her face against the car window. "It's like a castle." "Do you think the people who live there are happy?" Emma asked, her always perceptive mind working. "I think," I said carefully, "that happiness comes from the people you share a home with, not from the size of the house. But having enough space for everyone to be comfortable doesn't hurt." "Will we ever live in a house like that?" Sophie asked dreamily. I caught her eyes in the rear view. "Mira, what would you do if we did?" "I'd have my own art room," she said immediately, "with lots of windows and places to hang all my paintings. And I'd have a library," Emma added, "with a reading corner and shelves that go all the way to the ceiling." "Those sound like wonderful dreams," I said, my heart racing with the secret I was carrying. Sometimes dreams come true when you work hard enough for them. As we drove away, I made a mental note to ensure the house would have both an art studio and a library. My daughters deserved to have their dreams come true, and I was finally in a position to make that happen. The closing was scheduled for the following month, giving me time to plan the perfect reveal. Sarah's family had spent years undermining my confidence, making me question whether I was enough for my daughters. Soon, they'd discovered just how wrong they'd been. The closing took place in a sterile conference room at the title company, surrounded by lawyers, agents, and enough paperwork to fill a small library. I sat at one end of the polished table, wire transfer confirmations spread before me like a winning hand of cards. Mr. Johnson, the title officer said, sliding the final documents across to me, this is quite unusual. In 20 years of real estate closings, I've never seen someone purchase a property of this magnitude entirely in cash, without even a mortgage pre-approval. I signed my name with a steady hand, each signature bringing me closer to the moment I'd been dreaming about for months. The sellers, an elderly couple relocating to Florence, seemed bewildered by the speed of the transaction. We hope you'll be as happy in the house as we were, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. We raised 3 children there. The backyard is perfect for family barbecues, and the art studio upstairs has the most beautiful light. In the afternoons, I'm sure we'll love it, I replied. Accepting the keys, she pressed into my palm. They were warm from her touch, and surprisingly heavy, not just the physical weight, but the symbolic weight of everything they represented. As I walked to my car, keys jingling in my pocket, I felt a surreal disconnect from reality. 6 months ago, I'd been a struggling single dad worried about making rent. Now, I owned a $2.8 million house in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. The drive to the new house felt like a pilgrimage. I'd been there several times during the inspection process, but this was different. This time, I wasn't a visitor, I was coming home. The late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the circular driveway as I pulled up to the front entrance. The house looked even more magnificent than I remembered, its stone facade glowing golden in the warm light. I sat in my car for several minutes, just absorbing the moment. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Girls want to know if you're still picking them up Friday. They're excited about the weekend. I smiled, typing back. Absolutely. I have a surprise planned. If only she knew how massive that surprise would be. Inside the house, my footsteps echoed through empty rooms that would soon be filled with laughter and life. I walked through each space slowly, imagining how it would look once we moved in. The kitchen was large enough for cooking projects with the twins. The living room had a fireplace where we could read stories on winter evenings. The master bedroom had a window seat where I could watch the girls play in the backyard, but it was the third-floor art studio that made me emotional. The afternoon light streaming through those floor-to-ceiling windows was every bit as beautiful as Mrs. Patterson had promised. I could already picture Sophie up here, surrounded by canvases and paintbrushes, creating the artwork that would someday cover our refrigerator. I pulled out my phone and called Rebecca. Congratulations, Marcus, she said before I could speak. How does it feel to be a homeowner? Terrifying and wonderful, I admitted. Rebecca, I need to ask a favor. I want to furnish the entire house before my daughters see it. Can you recommend an interior designer who works quickly and doesn't ask too many questions? I know just the person. Alina Vasquez is discreet, talented, and used to working with clients who have specific timelines. She furnished a tech CEO's entire penthouse in 2 weeks once. Perfect. Have her call me tonight. Budget isn't a concern, I just want it to feel like home. As I walked back to my car, I took one last look at the house. In 72 hours, I would bring Emma and Sophie here for the first time. The expressions on their faces when they realized this was theirs would make every sacrifice. Every sleepless night, every moment of doubt worth it. Sarah's family thought they knew my limits. They had built their case around my supposed inadequacies, my inability to provide properly for my daughters. The deed in my briefcase told a different story entirely. Sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. Sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who change everything. Alina Vasquez arrived at the house the next morning with a team that moved like a military operation. She was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, the kind of person who could transform chaos into beauty with surgical precision. 2 weeks to furnish a 6-bedroom house, she said, walking through the empty rooms with her, tablet in hand. Most designers would say it's impossible. I say it's Tuesday. I followed her through the house explaining my vision. I want it to feel lived in, not like a showroom. My daughters are 8-year-old twins. They need spaces that encourage creativity and play, but also sophistication as they grow up. Alina nodded, making rapid notes. Tell me about the girls. What do they love? Emma's our reader. She devours books like other kids eat candy. Sophie's the artist. She's been begging for real art supplies instead of the drugstore crayons I've been buying. They both love to cook with me, and they're fascinated by science experiments. Perfect. Alina smiled. I'm seeing built-in bookshelves for Emma's room, floor to ceiling with a reading nook. For Sophie, we'll turn that third-floor studio into a proper art space, easels, supply storage, a sink for cleanup. The kitchen gets upgraded with kid-friendly features they can grow into. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a frenzy of deliveries, installations, and careful coordination. I spent my lunch breaks approving fabric samples and paint colors via video calls. Evenings found me at the house, helping direct furniture placement and ensuring every detail was perfect. The moving company Alina recommended was discreet and efficient. I'd packed up our apartment secretly, telling the girls we were organizing and donating things we don't need. Most of our belongings would come with us, but they'd be joined by furniture that transformed our humble possessions into a cohesive, beautiful whole. Emma's room emerged first soft lavender walls with white built-in bookcases that stretched from floor to ceiling. Alina had found an antique library ladder that allowed access to the highest shelves. A window seat with plush cushions overlooked the backyard, and a small writing desk sat beneath another window. The room felt like something from a fairy tale. Sophie's room was a celebration of color-sunny yellow walls, with an accent wall covered in chalkboard paint, where she could draw directly on the surface. Her art supplies would live in the third-floor studio, but her bedroom had a smaller easel and a gallery wall where her favorite pieces could be displayed. The art studio itself was breathtaking. Alina had installed professional lighting, a utility sink with hot and cold water, and storage solutions that could accommodate everything from watercolors to clay work. The moving company invoice showed the cost of delivering a pottery wheel. Surprise, I'd added at the last minute when I remembered Sophie's fascination with a ceramics demonstration at school. This room will inspire her for years to come, Alina said as we did a final walkthrough. The north-facing windows provide perfect, consistent light, and there's room for her interests to expand. The master bedroom was elegant, but warm deep. Blue walls with cream accents. Furniture that felt substantial without being overwhelming. But my favorite touch was the family photo wall Alina had created in the hallway. She'd taken all our existing pictures and had them professionally creating a gallery that told the story of our family's journey. Every home needs to tell a story, she explained. These photos show that this isn't just a house someone bought, it's a place where a family belongs. The final touch was the library. Alina had converted one of the guest rooms into a proper reading room, with floor-to-ceiling bookcases, a comfortable reading chair, and a small table perfect for homework or writing. She'd even ordered the complete series of books I knew Emma was desperate to read, but that I'd been buying one at a time due to budget constraints. On Thursday evening, Alina handed me a thick folder containing warranties, care instructions, and photos of every room. "It's ready," she said simply. "Your daughters are going to think they've walked into a dream." Standing in the foyer, looking up at the chandelier that cast rainbow patterns on the walls, I felt the weight of what I'd accomplished. This wasn't just about proving Sarah's family wrong, anymore it was about giving Emma and Sophie the childhood I'd always wanted them to have. A place where they could grow, create, and believe that anything was possible. The surprise was perfect. Tomorrow, I would change my daughters' lives forever. The family court building hadn't changed in the 3 months since our last hearing, but everything else felt different. I sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair outside courtroom B, watching Sarah and her family huddle in their usual formation across the hallway. Patricia wore her courtroom armor, a severe black suit that made her look like she was attending a funeral rather than a custody hearing. This time, they'd brought reinforcements. Sarah's father, Richard, had flown in from Seattle specifically for this hearing. His presence meant they were serious about whatever they planned to argue today. Marcus Johnson, my attorney, David Martinez, appeared at my elbow with his trademark calm expression. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, straightening my tie. I'd worn my best suit, the same one I'd worn to sign the house papers a week ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Inside the courtroom, Judge Patricia Holloway looked tired before we even began. She'd been presiding over our case for the better part of a year, and I could see in her expression that she was hoping today would bring some resolution to what had become an increasingly bitter dispute. "We're here to address the petition filed by Mrs. Williams regarding living conditions and their impact on the minor children," Judge Holloway began. "Mrs. Williams, you may proceed." Sarah's attorney, a sharp woman named Catherine Ellis, who specialized in high-conflict custody cases, stood with a folder thick enough to stop bullets. "Your Honor, we're concerned about the ongoing instability in Mr. Johnson's living situation, and its impact on Emma and Sophie's well-being. For the next 20 minutes, they systematically dissected my life, the tiny apartment, my work schedule, the financial stress they assumed I was under based on my modest lifestyle." Catherine presented photographs of my apartment, when had they taken those, and documented every instance where the girls had mentioned being cramped or wishing they had more space. Patricia took the stand as a character witness, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Those precious girls come to visit me and tell me they can hear their daddy on work calls late into the night. They talk about wanting their own rooms, about feeling like they can't have friends over because there's nowhere for them to play properly." It was masterfully done. Every word technically true, but painted in the worst possible light. They weren't lying, they were simply telling a version of the truth that served their narrative. "Your Honor," Patricia continued, "we're not questioning Marcus's love for his daughters. We're questioning whether love alone is sufficient when a child's basic needs for space, stability, and appropriate living conditions aren't being met." Judge Holloway took notes throughout the presentation, occasionally glancing at me with what looked like sympathy. When it was my turn to respond, I stood slowly, feeling the weight of the secret I was carrying. "Your Honor, I understand the concerns being raised," I said carefully. "I've always prioritized my daughter's emotional and physical well-being above all else. Yes, our current living situation is modest, but it's clean, safe, and filled with love. David had advised me to reveal the house purchase during this hearing, to end the custody battle with a dramatic flourish, but something in Patricia's smug expression stopped me. She was so certain she'd won, so confident in her assessment of my limitations. "Mr. Johnson," Judge Holloway said, "while I appreciate that you're doing your best under challenging circumstances, I do have concerns about the long-term viability of the current arrangement. The court's primary obligation is to the best interests of the children. I understand, Your Honor. All I ask is that you give me a little more time to address these concerns." Catherine Ellis practically pounced. "How much more time, Mr. Johnson? These children have been living in substandard conditions for over a year. At what point do we acknowledge that good intentions aren't enough?" The court transcripts would later show that I paused for exactly 7 seconds. Before responding, 7 seconds, where I made a decision that would change everything. "1 week," I said quietly. "Give me 1 week to demonstrate that I can provide everything my daughters need." Judge Holloway looked skeptical. "Mr. Johnson, unless you're planning to win the lottery, I'm not sure what significant changes you can make to your living situation in 7 days. Your Honor, sometimes the biggest changes are the ones people don't see coming." As we filed out of the courtroom, Patricia brushed past me with a cold smile. "1 week won't change anything. Marcus, we both know you can't afford to give those girls what they deserve." I watched her walk away, Richard's hand protectively on her shoulder, both of them radiating the confidence that comes from believing you've already won, that if only they knew what was waiting for them. The text messages started, arriving 30 minutes after we left the courthouse. I was driving home, mentally rehearsing how I'd explain the hearing to Emma and Sophie without worrying them, when my phone began buzzing incessantly. "Patricia, I hope you understand what's best for the girls. Marcus, this has gone on long enough. Richard, nothing personal, but they deserve better than what you can provide. We're prepared to offer you generous visitation rights. Sarah, Dad thinks we should discuss a more permanent arrangement. Maybe it's time to be realistic about what's best for everyone." I pulled into a parking lot and read through the messages, my hands tightening on the steering wheel with each one. They weren't even waiting for the judge's decision. They'd already decided the outcome in their minds. But it was the final message, sent an hour later, that broke something inside me. "Patricia, the girls called asking why the hearing was taking so long. I told them sometimes daddies try very hard but just can't give their children everything they need. They seemed to understand." I stared at that message until the words blurred. They'd spoken to my daughters about the custody hearing. They'd planted seeds of doubt about my ability to care for them, making them question whether their father was enough. That evening, when I picked up Emma and Sophie for our regular Wednesday dinner, I could see the conversation had affected them. They were quieter than usual, more hesitant to share details about their day. "Daddy," Sophie said as I helped her with her homework, "Grandma Patricia says you work really hard to take care of us." "I do work hard," I confirmed, wondering where this was leading. "She says sometimes working hard isn't enough though. She says sometimes people need help to give children what they really need." Emma looked up from her math worksheet. "Are we going to have to choose where to live?" The question hit me like a physical blow. These were 8-year-old children being forced to contemplate adult decisions, having their security undermined by people who claim to love them. "Listen to me, both of you," I said, kneeling down so I was at their eye level. "No matter what anyone says, no matter what anyone tries to make you think, you are my daughters, and I will always be able to take care of you. Always." "But what if?" Emma started. "No what ifs," I said firmly. "Some people think they know what's best for our family, but they don't understand what we have together. They don't see how strong we are." Sophie nodded solemnly, but I could see the worry in her eyes hadn't completely disappeared. That night, after I'd taken them back to Sarah's house, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by boxers I'd already packed in preparation for the move. The contrast between my current reality and what awaited us in Willowbrook Estates felt surreal. My phone rang at 10 p.m. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Marcus, we need to talk." "About what?" "About being realistic, about what's best for the girls." Her voice sounded tired, defeated. "Dad flew out here because he thinks this has gone on long enough. He's prepared to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" "Full college tuition for both girls. Trust funds that would set them up for life. All you'd have to do is agree to step back and let them have the stability they deserve." I was quiet for so long that Sarah asked if I was still there. "I'm here," I said finally. "I'm just trying to understand how you went from being the woman who fell in love with a man who refused your father's job offer to someone who thinks money is more important than a father's love." "This isn't about love, Marcus. It's about what's practical, what's realistic. And you think I'm being unrealistic by wanting to raise my own daughters. I think you're being stubborn. Pride isn't going to give them the opportunities my family can provide." After I hung up, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos from the house. Emma's library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, Sophie's art studio with natural light streaming through those magnificent windows, the backyard where they could run and play safely. I thought about the screenshot folder on my phone, all those cruel text messages from Sarah's family, documented evidence of their campaign to undermine my relationship with my daughters. Tomorrow was Thursday. On Friday afternoon, I would pick up Emma and Sophie for what everyone assumed would be another weekend in our cramped apartment. Instead, I would drive them to their new home and watch their faces as they discovered that their father had been full of surprises all along. Patricia thought she understood my limitations. Richard was convinced he knew the extent of my capabilities. Sarah had decided I was too proud to accept reality. They were about to learn just how wrong they'd all been. Friday afternoon couldn't come fast enough. I'd barely slept the night before, running through the reveal in my mind like a director rehearsing the most important scene of his career. Every detail had to be perfect. The timing, the route, the moment when everything would change for my daughters. I arrived at Sarah's house at exactly 3:30 p.m. As scheduled, the familiar routine of pickup felt strange knowing it would be our last time doing this dance. Emma and Sophie bounded down the front steps with their weekend bags, their faces bright with the anticipation that always accompanied our time together. "Daddy." Sophie threw herself into my arms with her typical enthusiasm. "Can we make pancakes tomorrow morning? And can we work on my painting?" "We can do whatever you want this weekend," I said, my heart racing with the magnitude of that statement. "Both of you, buckle up. We're going on a little adventure before we head home." Emma, always the more observant twin, noticed something different immediately. "Daddy, you seem excited about something. Your eyes are all sparkly." "Do I?" Her gaze in the rearview mirror as we pulled away from Sarah's house. "Maybe I am excited. Maybe I have a surprise." "What kind of surprise?" Sophie bounced in her booster seat. "Is it big or little?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "It's the biggest surprise I've ever had for anyone." For the first 10 minutes of our drive, the girls chattered about their week at school, Sophie's latest art project, and Emma's progress through the latest book in her favorite series. But as we continued driving, past the usual turns that led to our apartment, their conversation gradually shifted to curiosity about our route. "Daddy, where are we going?" Emma asked as we entered the Willowbrook Estates neighborhood. "This isn't the way home." The gated community looked even more beautiful than I remembered. The afternoon sun filtered through the mature oak trees lining the streets, and children rode bicycles on sidewalks that actually had room for both bikes and pedestrians. I slowed down deliberately, wanting the girls to take in every detail. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "the way home changes." Sophie pressed her face against the window. "Daddy, look at these houses. They're so big. Do you think the families who live here are happy?" "I think," I said, remembering her similar question from our previous drive through the neighborhood, "that happiness comes from being with the people you love. But having a beautiful place to call home doesn't hurt." We turned onto Maple Ridge Drive, and there it was, our house. Our home. The late afternoon light made the stone facade glow warmly, and the landscaping looked even more perfect than when I'd last seen it. I pulled into the circular driveway and put the car in park, my hands trembling slightly as I turned off the engine. "Daddy, why are we stopping here?" Emma's voice held a note of confusion. "Are we visiting someone?" I turned around in my seat to face both girls, pulling out the custom keychain Alina had made. 2 silver keys hung from a small charm engraved with "Home Sweet Home," and both of their names. "Emma, Sophie," I said, my voice thick with emotion I couldn't quite control. "Do you remember when you asked me if we'd ever live in a house like this?" Both girls nodded, their eyes fixed on the keys in my hand. "Do you remember what I told you about dreams coming true when you work hard enough for them?" Sophie's eyes went wide. Emma's mouth dropped open slightly as understanding began to dawn. "This house," I said, holding up the keys, "is ours. This is our new home." The silence in the car lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Sophie screamed a sound of pure joy that probably scared every bird in the neighborhood. Emma just stared at me, then at the house, then back at me, as if trying to process information that didn't quite fit in her 8-year-old understanding of how the world worked. "Daddy, are you serious?" Emma whispered. "This is really ours. Every single room," I confirmed, getting out of the car and walking around to open their doors. "Want to see your new bedrooms?" The front door opened onto a foyer that took my breath away, even though I'd seen it dozens of times. The chandelier cast rainbow patterns across the marble floor, and the curved staircase seemed to float upward, like something from a fairy tale. But I wasn't watching the house, I was watching my daughters' faces. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, her weekend bag forgotten at her feet. Sophie had moved past shock into pure exploration mode, running her hands along the smooth banister and calling out, "Hello, house, we're here." "This is the foyer," I said unnecessarily, my voice echoing in the large space. "And this is just the beginning." The tour that followed was a masterclass in 8-year-old wonder. Sophie gasped at the kitchen with its huge island and child-height stools that Alina had specifically chosen. Emma ran her fingers along the built-in bookcases in the living room, already mentally cataloging which books would go where. "Daddy, is this really real?" Emma asked for the 4th time as we climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. "We're really going to live here. We're really going to live here," I confirmed. "Would you like to see your rooms?" I'd planned to show them Emma's room first, but Sophie spotted the art supplies Alina had arranged on the hallway to Boya. small preview of what waited upstairs in the studio. Are those for me? She whispered, approaching the display like it might disappear if she moved too quickly. Those are just the beginning, I said. But first, let me show you something else. Emma's room was everything I'd dreamed it would be. The built-in bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling. The library ladder invited exploration, and the window seat overlooked the backyard where she could read in natural light. But what made Emma cry were the book's dozens of new titles I'd seen her wish list for, all arranged and waiting for her. Daddy, she said, tears streaming down her face. How did you know which books I wanted? Because I pay attention to everything about you, I said, kneeling down to hug her. Because you're my daughter, and knowing what makes you happy is my... Sophie's room was an explosion of color and possibility. The chalkboard wall had been primed with a welcome message Alina had written in perfect script. Welcome home, Sophie. Let your creativity shine. But it was the gallery wall featuring every piece of art Sophie had ever given me, professionally framed and beautifully displayed, that made her burst into tears. You kept all of them, she sobbed, touching the frame around a finger painting she'd made in kindergarten. Even the messy ones. Especially the messy ones, I said. Art isn't supposed to be perfect, sweetheart. It's supposed to be real. But the art studio on the third floor was where Sophie completely lost composure. The north-facing windows flooded the space with perfect light. Professional easels stood ready for use. A pottery wheel, the one item I'd been most excited to surprise her with, sat in the corner next to a utility sink. Sophie walked through the space like she was touring a cathedral. She touched each surface reverently, opened every drawer to discover supplies I'd only dreamed of buying her, and finally, stood in the center of the room with her arms outstretched. I can make anything here, she said, her voice filled with awe. Anything I can imagine. That's exactly the point, I said. The master bedroom tour was brief this weekend was about them, not me. But Emma noticed the family photo wall Alina had created in the hallway, and she stopped in front of it with the same expression she wore when solving complex math problems. Daddy, she said slowly, when did you plan all this? I've been working on it for months, I admitted. Every late night, every weekend project. Every time you heard me on work calls, I was building this for us. But how? Emma's logical mind was trying to process the impossibility of our transformation. Houses like this cost millions of dollars. I knelt down so I was at eye level with both girls. Do you remember how I always told you that working hard and being smart about problems could open doors you didn't even know existed? They both nodded. Well, I solved some very big problems for some very important companies, and they paid me enough money to buy us this house. Sophie threw her arms around my neck. You're like a superhero, Daddy. But instead of fighting bad guys, you fight computer problems. Emma's hug was quieter, but just as intense. I never doubted you, she whispered, even when Grandma Patricia said. She stopped herself. What did Grandma Patricia say? She said sometimes daddies can't give their children everything they need, but I told her she was wrong. I told her my daddy could do anything. As we stood in our new home, arms wrapped around each other, I realized this moment was worth every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every doubt I'd wrestled with over the past year. This wasn't just about proving Sarah's family wrong anymore. It was about proving to my daughters that their faith in me had never been misplaced. In the foyer, I picked up my phone to take our first family photo in the new house. Emma and Sophie flanked me, their faces glowing with happiness and possibility. Say home, I instructed. Home, they chorused, and I knew we'd finally found ours. Sunday morning came too soon and too slowly at the same time. The girls had spent the entire weekend exploring every corner of their new home, establishing routines that felt both natural and magical. Emma had already organized her books by series, and created a reading schedule that would take her through the summer. Sophie had started 3 different art projects and covered the chalkboard wall with sketches and plans for future masterpieces. We were making pancakes in our enormous kitchen, tradition that felt both familiar and completely transformed in the new space, when Emma's phone rang. Sarah had given both girls their own phones for emergencies and staying in touch, a decision I'd initially opposed, but now appreciated for the independence it fostered. Hi, Mom, Emma answered cheerfully, putting the call on speaker as she flipped a pancake with the confidence of someone who finally had enough counter space to cook properly. Good morning, sweetie. Sarah's voice filled the kitchen. How's your weekend going? Are you and Sophie ready for Dad to bring you home this afternoon? Mom, you'll never believe where we are. Emma's excitement bubbled over before I could intervene. We're in our new house. Dad bought us a mansion. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Sophie looked at the phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Emma, Sarah's voice came back carefully controlled. What do you mean, new house? It's huge. Mom, I have my own library with shelves that go all the way to the ceiling, and Sophie has an art studio on the 3rd floor with a pottery wheel, and there's a swimming pool and a backyard where we could probably fit our whole apartment. Sophie grabbed the phone. Mom, you should see my room. All my paintings are hanging on the wall like in a real museum, and the art studio has windows everywhere, so the light is perfect for painting. Girls, Sarah's voice had taken on an edge I recognized. Let me talk to your father. Emma handed me the phone with a confused expression. She'd expected her mother to share in their excitement, not sound like she was trying to solve a crime. "Sarah," I said simply. "Marcus, what the hell is going on? The girls are talking about a mansion and art studios, and I don't understand what's happening." "We moved," I said, flipping Sophie's pancake while keeping my voice casual. "The apartment was getting too small, so I bought us a house." "You bought a house?" Her voice was flat with disbelief. "Marcus, you can't afford to buy a house. We've been fighting about your financial limitations for months. Apparently you were misinformed about my financial limitations. This isn't funny. Where did you get the money? Did you take out some kind of predatory loan? Because if you put the girls at risk with debt you can't handle." "I paid cash, Sarah." The silence this time was so complete I thought the call had dropped. Emma and Sophie had stopped eating, sensing the tension, even if they didn't understand. "Its source? You paid cash," Sarah repeated slowly. "For a house. A mansion, according to our daughters. $2.8 million, I said, deciding that if we were doing this, we might as well do it completely. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, gated community. The girls can give you the full tour when you pick them up this afternoon. Marcus, I'm going to ask you one more time. Where did you get that kind of money?" "I earned it. Chen Digital Solutions has been quite successful. The quantum dynamics contract alone was worth more than both our annual salaries combined." I could hear her breathing, could almost picture her trying to process information that didn't fit with everything she thought she knew about our post-divorce reality. "You've been lying to me," she said finally. "I've been private about my business success. There's a difference. For how long? How long have you been hiding this from me?" "I haven't been hiding anything, Sarah. You and your family made it very clear that you'd already decided what I was capable of providing for our daughters. I saw no reason to challenge those assumptions until it became necessary." "Oh my God." Her voice was barely a whisper. "The custody hearing. You sat there and let us attack your living situation when you'd already bought a mansion. I sat there and listened to people who claimed to love my daughters argue that I wasn't good enough to raise them. I let the court system work exactly as it was designed to work." Emma was watching me with wide eyes, beginning to understand that this phone call was about more than just sharing good news about their new home. "Sarah," I said gently, "the girls are listening, and they're excited about showing you their new rooms this afternoon. Can we table the interrogation until after they've had a chance to share their weekend with you?" There was a long pause. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, uncertain. "Marcus, I need to call my mother. She's going to want to know about this." "I'm sure she will," I said. "The address is 847 Maple Ridge Drive in Willowbrook Estates, if she'd like to update her records." After Sarah hung up, Emma looked at me with her serious 8-year-old expression. "Daddy, is Mom upset about our new house?" "Mom's surprised. Sweetheart, sometimes when people are very surprised, it takes them a little while to be happy about good news." Sophie, ever the optimist, grinned. "Wait until she sees my art studio. She'll understand why this is the best surprise ever." As I watched my daughters finish their breakfast in our beautiful kitchen, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The surprise was perfect. But the phone call was a reminder that some battles create casualties even when you win. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "We need to talk today." I smiled, setting the phone aside. Yes, we certainly did. The private investigator's report arrived in Patricia's email Monday morning, less than 24 hours after Sarah's panicked phone call about the mansion. The subject line read, "Chen Financial Investigation, Urgent Findings." I learned about the investigation later, but I could imagine Patricia's shock as she read through the meticulously documented evidence of my actual financial situation. The PI, a thorough professional named Detective Morris, who specialized in asset investigations for family law cases, had worked through the weekend to compile a comprehensive picture of my business dealings. The report's executive summary was damning for Patricia's assumptions, not for me. Subject: Marcus Chen operates a legitimate and highly profitable technology consulting firm. Chen Digital Solutions, LLC, incorporated 14 months ago, has generated approximately $3.2 million in gross revenue through contracts with major corporations, including Quantum Dynamics, Techstart Industries, and others. Subject's personal net worth, including recent real estate acquisition, is estimated at $4.1 million. All income appears to be legally obtained through legitimate business activities. The supporting documentation was exhaustive. Bank statements showing the Quantum Dynamics payment, corporate records proving the legitimacy of my business, property records confirming the cash purchase of the Willowbrook house, even photographs Detective Maurice had taken of the house and neighborhood, proving that Emma and Sophie hadn't been exaggerating about our mansion. But the most telling part of the report was the timeline it revealed. Every major contract, every business milestone, every financial success had occurred during the period when Patricia and her family were actively arguing that I was unfit to properly support my daughters. The pie had also uncovered something I hadn't expected: a detailed analysis of my previous living situation that put Patricia's attacks in a new light. Subject's previous apartment, while modest in size, was maintained in excellent condition and located in a safe neighborhood with good schools. Rent was approximately 15% of subject's gross income at time of lease signing, indicating strong financial management rather than inability to afford better housing. Detective Morris had even interviewed neighbors and school officials. The picture that emerged was of a devoted father who prioritized his children's needs, maintained a stable home environment, and was well regarded by teachers and community members. The report concluded with a section that must have been particularly difficult for Patricia to read. Investigation reveals no evidence of financial instability, poor judgment, or inability to provide for minor children. Subject appears to have deliberately maintained a modest lifestyle while building substantial wealth through legitimate business success. Patricia's response to the report was swift and decisive. She called an emergency family meeting for Monday evening, summoning Richard from Seattle and demanding that Sarah take time off work to attend. The meeting location was significant: not Patricia's house, where they usually gathered, but a private dining room at the country club where they could speak freely without risk of being overheard. Sarah later told me about that meeting. During one of our more honest conversations weeks afterward, according to her, Patricia had spread the investigator's report across the polished conference table like evidence at a crime scene. "We've been made fools of," Patricia announced without preamble, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "Marcus has been sitting in courtrooms, listening to us question his adequacy as a provider, while he had millions in the bank." Richard studied the financial documents with the analytical eye of someone who'd built his own business empire. "This is impressive," he admitted grudgingly. "Chen Digital Solutions has secured contracts with some very serious companies. The quantum dynamics deal alone is the kind of project that establishes long-term industry credibility." "That's not the point," Patricia snapped. "The point is that he deceived us. He let us believe he was struggling when he was building a fortune." Sarah, according to her later account, sat quietly through most of the meeting, absorbing the reality that the man she'd divorced for his lack of ambition had become more financially successful than her own family's hotel business. "Mom," Sarah finally said, "maybe the question isn't why Marcus didn't tell us about his success. Maybe the question is why we were so quick to assume he couldn't achieve it." The room fell silent. Patricia had spent months building a case around Marcus's perceived limitations, and that case had just crumbled under the weight of documented evidence. "What do we do now?" Richard asked pragmatically. "The custody hearing is scheduled for Friday. We can't exactly argue that he can't provide for the girls when he's just bought them a $3 million house." Patricia's jaw tightened. "We argue that this proves he's been dishonest, that he's been hiding his true financial situation for reasons we don't understand. That kind of deception raises questions about his character, doesn't it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Or does it prove that he's exactly who I thought he was when I married him? Someone who doesn't need to prove himself to people who've already decided he's not good enough." The meeting ended without resolution, but with the clear understanding that their strategy had backfired spectacularly. The bank statement printout Detective Maurice had included in his report showed not just the house purchase, but months of financial stability that made their previous arguments about Marcus's inadequacy look petty and misguided. What none of them knew was that Marcus had been aware of the investigation from the beginning. His bank had called to verify some of the inquiries, and Rebecca Santos had mentioned that someone was asking questions about the house purchase. Marcus had chosen not to interfere with their fact-finding mission, confident that the truth would speak for itself. The investigation they'd commissioned to find ammunition against him had instead documented exactly what he'd been trying to prove. All along, that underestimating him had been their biggest mistake. They arrived unannounced on Wednesday morning. I was working in my new home office, a room with built-in shelves and natural light that made my old apartment corner setup look like a joke when the doorbell rang. Through the security system, Alina had recommended, I could see Patricia's Mercedes in the circular driveway, with Richard and Sarah emerging from the vehicle like a delegation preparing for difficult negotiations. I opened the door before they could ring again, stepping onto the front porch and closing the door behind me. Whatever conversation we were about to have, I wanted it to happen away from the girls, who were upstairs in Sophie's art studio working on a collaborative painting. Patricia, Richard, Sarah. I nodded to each of them in turn. This is unexpected. Patricia's usual composure was cracked around the edges. She'd always prided herself on being in control of every situation. But standing in front of my house, our house had clearly shaken her more than she wanted to admit. We need to talk, she said, her voice lacking its usual authority. Of course. Would you like to come in? The girls would love to give you the tours they've been planning. Richard stepped forward, pulling out his phone and showing me a photo of the private investigator's report. We know about Johnson Digital Solutions. We know about the quantum dynamics contract. We know you've been hiding your financial success while we've been fighting about your ability to provide for Emma and Sophie. I haven't been hiding anything, I said calmly. You never asked about my business. You simply assumed I was failing, because that assumption served your narrative. Patricia's mask finally slipped completely. You made us look like fools. Marcus, you sat in that courtroom and let us attack your living situation when you'd already bought a mansion. I sat in that courtroom and listened to people who claimed to love my daughters argue that I wasn't worthy of raising them. The judge asked me to prove I could provide for them, and I said I needed 1 week. This is what I was talking about. Sarah had been quiet throughout the exchange, but now she stepped closer to the front door, studying the details Alina had chosen for the entrance. Marcus, the girls showed me their rooms on Sunday. Sophie's art studio is incredible. Emma's library is something out of a fairy tale. How long have you been planning this? Since the day you told me I was holding our family back by refusing your father's job offer, since the moment I realized you'd decided I wasn't enough for you or for our daughters. That's not what Sarah started, but I held up a hand. That's exactly what you meant. Sarah, and your family has spent the past year reinforcing that message every chance they got. Patricia pulled out a folded piece of paper, her handwritten apology letter. I realized later. Her hands trembled slightly as she offered it to me. Marcus, I owe you an apology. We all do. I was wrong about your capabilities, wrong about your commitment to the girls, and wrong about what kind of man you are. I took the letter but didn't open it. What changed your mind? The private investigator's report, or seeing the house? Both, she admitted, but mostly realizing that Emma and Sophie have never been happier. They talk about this place like it's a magical kingdom, and they talk about you like you're the hero who made it all possible, because that's exactly what he is. Emma's voice came from behind me. I turned to see both girls peering through the front window, having apparently decided that an adult conversation on the front porch required their supervision. I opened the door and let them join us outside. Girls, you remember Grandma, Patricia, and Grandpa Richard. Would you like to see our new house? Sophie asked politely, though her excitement was barely contained. Daddy, can we show them my art studio? Patricia looked at me uncertainly. If your father doesn't mind, they're your granddaughters, I said simply. Of course you can see their home. The tour that followed was a masterclass in 8-year-old pride. Emma explained every detail of her library with the thoroughness of a professional docent. Sophie demonstrated the proper lighting techniques in her art studio and showed off the pottery wheel she'd already learned to use. They pointed out every photo in the family gallery wall, every thoughtful detail Alina had included to make the house feel like home. Patricia and Richard followed in stunned silence, occasionally exchanging glances that spoke volumes about their reassessment of everything they thought they knew about my life. Marcus, Richard said, as we concluded the tours in the kitchen, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you respect. What you've built here, what you've accomplished for your daughters, it's extraordinary. It's what any father would do if he could, I replied. I just happened to be in a position where I could. No, Patricia said firmly. Not any father would think to include a gallery wall of his daughter's artwork, or design a library that encourages a love of reading, or create an art studio that nurtures creativity. This isn't just about money, Marcus. This is about understanding what your children need to flourish. As they prepared to leave, Patricia turned to me one final time. The custody hearing on Friday, we're withdrawing our petition. We have no grounds to argue that you can't provide for Emma and Sophie, and more importantly, we have no desire to continue a fight that was wrong from the beginning. After their car disappeared through the neighborhood gates, Emma looked up at me with her serious expression. Dottie, why did it take them so long to understand that you're amazing? Sometimes, sweetheart, people have to see the whole picture before they can appreciate what they're looking at. Sophie nodded sagely, like in art class, when you have to step back from your painting to see if it's really finished. Exactly, like that, I said, pulling both girls close. Sometimes the most beautiful things take time to reveal themselves. Sarah called that evening, after the girls had gone to bed in their beautiful new rooms. I was sitting in the master bedroom, looking out at the backyard where Emma and Sophie had spent the afternoon planning a garden they wanted to plant together. When her name appeared on my phone, "Hi," she said simply when I answered. "Hi, I keep thinking about today, about seeing the house, about watching Emma and Sophie show us around like they were touring royalty through their castle." I waited, sensing she had more to say. "Marcus, I found something today while I was cleaning out some boxes." She paused, and I could hear rustling in the background. Our wedding photo, the one from our honeymoon in Monterey, where we're sitting on that rock overlooking the ocean. I remembered that photo. We'd been married for exactly 6 days, staying in a tiny bed and breakfast that was all we could afford at the time. Sarah had been laughing at something I'd said, probably another terrible joke, and her hair was catching the sunset light. We'd looked ridiculously happy. I remember I said, I was looking at it, really looking at it, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I saw you smile the way you were smiling in that picture. And then I realized it was because I stopped giving you reasons to smile like that. Sarah knew. Let me finish, please. Her voice was steady but thick with emotion. I married a man who turned down my father's job offer because he wanted to build something of his own. I married someone who valued independence and integrity over easy money. And then I spent 3 years trying to change him into someone who would take the easy path. I leaned back against the headboard, closing my eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because I owe you more than an apology. I owe you the truth. She took a shaky breath. Marcus, when you turned down Dad's offer 3 years ago, I was proud of you. Secretly, I was proud that you had the courage to bet on yourself instead of taking the safe option. Then why? Because I got scared. When the twins came along, when money got tighter, when my mother started her campaign about providing properly for our daughters, I let fear override everything I knew about who you were. Her voice broke slightly. I traded the man I fell in love with for the promise of financial security. And then I had the audacity to be disappointed when that security came with strings attached. Through the bedroom window, I could see the art studio lights still on where Sophie had left them, ready for tomorrow's creative session. You were protecting our family the best way you knew how. No, I was protecting myself. I was taking the easy path that I'd criticized you for refusing. She was quiet for a moment. Marcus, seeing you today, seeing what you've built for our daughters, not just the house, but the way they look at you, the confidence they have in you, I realized I threw away something precious because I was too afraid to trust it. I thought about the years of doubt, the custody battles, the constant need to prove myself to people who had already decided I wasn't enough. What are you saying, Sarah? I'm saying I was wrong. About everything. About you. About what our daughters needed. About what kind of father you are. She paused again. I'm saying that the man I divorced for lacking ambition just bought our children a mansion through his own hard work and intelligence, while I was busy trying to accept handouts from my parents. Sarah, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I absolutely do. Her voice was stronger now, more determined. Marcus, I want to start over. Not romantically, no. I destroyed that trust, and I'm not naive enough to think I can rebuild it easily, but as co-parents, as people who both love Emma and Sophie more than anything else in the world. What does that look like? It looks like me admitting that you don't need my family's help to provide for our daughters. It looks like me supporting you instead of questioning you. It looks like me teaching Emma and Sophie that their father is exactly the kind of man they should look for when they're old enough to fall in love, someone who works hard, keeps his promises, and never gives up on the people he loves. I found myself looking at the family photo wall Alina had created in the hallway, visible through the open bedroom door. Pictures of Emma and Sophie from every stage of their young lives, carefully preserved and beautifully displayed. The girls love you, Sarah. They need their mother, and they need their father. They need the father who turned a tiny apartment into a home, who worked 18-hour days to build something extraordinary, who never once made them feel like they were a burden or a limitation. She was crying now, but her voice remained clear. They need the father who saw their dreams and found a way to make them real. Co-parenting, I said, testing the words. What would that actually look like? It looks like me respecting your decisions. It looks like me supporting your relationship with the girls instead of undermining it. It looks like me admitting, to them and to anyone else who asks, that their father is remarkable and that I was too foolish to appreciate what I had. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my beautiful new bedroom, processing a conversation. I never expected to have the woman who had filed for divorce because I wasn't ambitious enough had just acknowledged that my ambition had exceeded everyone's expectations, including my own. Emma's voice drifted down from upstairs where she was reading in her library nook. Sophie, listen to this part, it's the best chapter yet. Sophie's response was muffled but enthusiastic, probably spoken around a paintbrush. She was holding in her teeth while working on her latest creation. Whatever happened between Sarah and me going forward, whatever shape our co-parenting relationship took, one thing was clear. Emma and Sophie were thriving in their new environment. They had space to grow, encouragement to dream, and the security of knowing their father would move mountains to give them the world. That was all I'd ever wanted. To prove, the revised custody agreement arrived by courier on Monday morning, drafted by Sarah's attorney but reflecting terms I never could have imagined a month earlier. Instead of fighting for limited access to my daughters, I was now being offered expanded custody that recognized my improved circumstances and stable home environment. David Martinez reviewed the documents in my home office, occasionally looking up from the papers to shake his head in amazement. Marcus, this is unprecedented. They're not just withdrawing their petition. They're acknowledging that your living situation exceeds any reasonable standard for child welfare. The legal language was formal, but the implications were profound. The agreement established that Emma and Sophie would spend alternating weeks with each parent, giving them consistency while allowing both Sarah and me to be fully involved in their daily lives. More importantly, it included clauses that prevented either parent from questioning the other's financial adequacy or living arrangements without documented cause. There's something else, David said, pointing to a section near the end of the document. They've included a provision that acknowledges your business success and establishes that any future financial contributions to the children's welfare, college tuition, extracurricular activities, medical expenses will be proportional to each parent's income. I understood what that meant. Sarah's family could no longer use their wealth as leverage in custody discussions. If they wanted to provide for Emma and Sophie, they'd have to do it as grandparents and family members, not as replacements for an allegedly inadequate father. The first week under the new arrangement was a revelation. Emma and Sophie moved between houses with the easy confidence of children who finally understood that both parents wanted them to be happy. There were no more tense exchanges at pickup, no more passive-aggressive comments about living conditions or parenting decisions. Most remarkably, Patricia began calling to ask permission before taking the girls on special outings or buying them expensive gifts, a courtesy that acknowledged my authority as their father rather than assuming I couldn't provide such experiences myself. "Marcus," she said during one such call, "I'd like to take Emma and Sophie to the museum's new interactive science exhibit this weekend. Would that conflict with any plans you've made?" It was a small thing, but it represented a seismic shift in how Sarah's family viewed my role in my daughters' lives. I was no longer the struggling single dad who needed their charity. I was an equal partner in raising children. We all loved. The girls themselves adapted to the new dynamic with the resilience that children often display when adults finally get their act together. They loved having two beautiful homes and seemed to understand instinctively that the tension between their parents had dissolved into something more positive. "Daddy," Emma said one evening, as we worked on homework in the library, "Mom says you're the smartest person she knows." I looked up from the math worksheet I was checking. "Does she?" She says she's sorry it took her so long to remember that. Emma's matter-of-fact delivery made the statement even more powerful. "Sophie and I always knew you were smart," though Sophie, who was working on an art project at the library table, nodded emphatically. "We tried to tell Grandma Patricia, but she didn't listen until she saw our house." "Sometimes adults need more evidence than children do," I said, pulling both girls close. "Sometimes we forget to trust what we know in our hearts." The transformation extended beyond our family dynamics. Word of my business success had spread through my professional network, leading to new contracts and opportunities I wouldn't have considered just months earlier. Johnson Digital Solutions was no longer a side hustle, what was becoming a legitimate player in the enterprise software consulting space. But the most satisfying change was subtler. The confidence that came from proving, once and for all, that love and hard work could overcome any limitation others tried to impose. The custody battle had forced me to define success on my own terms and then achieve it despite constant doubt from people who claimed to care about my children's welfare. 3 months after moving into the Willowbrook house, I received an unexpected text from Richard. "Marcus, I hope this isn't presumptuous, but I'd like to discuss a potential consulting project for our hotel chain's reservation system. Your reputation in the industry is impressive, and we could use someone with your expertise." I stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "I'd be happy to discuss it. Send me the project specifications, and we'll see if Johnson Digital Solutions is a good fit for your needs." It wasn't an olive branch, it was an acknowledgement of professional respect. The man who had once dismissed my potential was now seeking my expertise as an equal. That evening, as Emma read in her library nook and Sophie painted in her studio, I stood in the master bedroom looking out at the backyard, where my daughters had spent the afternoon planning their summer garden. The view was beautiful, but what made it meaningful was the sound of their laughter echoing through the house we'd made together. The custody battle was over. The doubters had been silenced. The limitations others had tried to impose had been shattered by evidence of what was possible when determination met opportunity. But the most important victory wasn't the house or the business success or even the revised custody agreement. It was the knowledge that Emma and Sophie would grow up understanding that their father had fought for them, worked for them, and never stopped believing that they deserved the very best life he could provide. That lesson would serve them well long after they'd outgrown even this beautiful house. 3 months later, I stood in Sophie's art studio watching her put the finishing touches on a painting that would join the dozens of others now covering the gallery wall downstairs. The afternoon light streaming through those magnificent windows was everything Alina had promised it would be, and more. "Daddy, look." Sophie stepped back from her easel, paintbrush still in hand. "It's our house, but I painted it like a castle because that's how it feels to me." The painting was beautiful in the way that only a child's art can be, full of love and wonder, with colors that defied reality but captured emotion perfectly. Our stone facade had become golden towers. The circular driveway was now a moat filled with friendly fish, and rainbow flags flew from every turret. "It's perfect," I said, meaning it completely. "Should we add it to the gallery downstairs?" "Yes, but first I want to show Emma. She's going to love the library tower I painted in the background." We found Emma in her favorite spot, the window seat in her bedroom, surrounded by books and completely absorbed in what appeared to be a mystery novel well above her grade level. The library had grown considerably since we'd moved in. Every birthday and holiday brought new additions, and Emma had developed a sophisticated system for organizing her collection by genre, author, and reading difficulty. "Emma, come see Sophie's new painting," I called from the doorway. She looked up with the slightly dazed expression of someone returning from a different world. 5 more minutes? I'm just getting to the part where they find the clue in the old library." "Of course," will be downstairs hanging Sophie's latest masterpiece. The children's artwork display had become one of my favorite features of the house. What had started as a simple gallery wall had evolved into a rotating exhibition space where both girls' creativity was celebrated and preserved. Elena's original framing had been joined by dozens of new pieces, creating a visual timeline of their artistic and emotional growth. As I helped Sophie choose the perfect spot for her castle painting, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Girls excited about the science camp next week. I think Emma's going to love the robotics workshop." Our co-parenting relationship had settled into something I never could have imagined during the darkest days of our custody battle. We communicated regularly about the girls' schedules, celebrated their achievements together, and made decisions as partners rather than adversaries. The transformation wasn't complete. There were still moments of awkwardness, still conversations that carried the weight of our shared history, but we'd found a way to put Emma and Sophie's needs first. "Daddy." Emma appeared at my elbow, having finally reached a stopping point in her book. "Sophie's painting is beautiful. I love how she made the library look like a tower in a fairy tale." "Speaking of the library," I said, "I have a surprise for both of you." Their eyes lit up with the anticipation that always accompanied my surprises. I'd become something of a legend in their minds for the dramatic reveals, first the house, then the art studio additions, then the reading nook improvements that made Emma's space even more magical. "Come with me," I said, leading them to the library. The surprise was smaller than the mansion reveal, but no less meaningful. I'd commissioned a local craftsman to create a custom bookend set featuring miniature versions of Emma and Sophie, each engaged in their favorite activities: reading, Sophie painting. The bookends were beautifully detailed and would grow in significance as the girls got older. "They're us," Sophie squealed, immediately understanding the gift's significance. Emma examined her bookend with scientific precision, noting every detail of the tiny reading nook and miniature books. "Daddy, these are perfect. They'll help us remember this time forever." "That's exactly the idea," I said. "No matter how big you grow, no matter where life takes you, you'll always have this reminder of the home where you learn that dreams can come true." As evening approached, we gathered in the kitchen to prepare dinner together, a tradition that had taken on new meaning in our spacious, well-equipped space. The girls chopped vegetables while I prepared the main course, and we talked about their upcoming week at science camp, Sophie's plans for her next art project, and Emma's progress through her current book series. "Daddy," Emma said as we sat down to eat, "do you remember when we lived in the little apartment and you used to say that someday we'd have a house with enough room for all our dreams?" "I remember. Did you know then that you could make it happen?" I considered the question carefully. I knew I would never stop trying. I knew that you and Sophie deserved the best life I could give you, and I was willing to work as hard as necessary to make that happen. Sophie nodded seriously. "Like in fairy tales, where the hero has to go on a long journey and fight dragons before he can save the princess? Except in our story," Emma added with 8-year-old logic, "the dragons were computer problems, and instead of saving a princess, Daddy was saving our future." After dinner, as the girls settled into their bedtime routines, I walked through the house that had become so much more than just a symbol of financial success. Every room held memories we'd made together, every corner reflected the love and intentionality that had gone into creating a true home. The family photo Alina had arranged for us still hung in the foyer. Emma, Sophie, and me on our first day in the house, our faces glowing with happiness and possibility. But it had been joined by dozens of others documenting our life together: birthday parties, holiday celebrations, quiet moments of reading and creating and growing. This house wasn't just proof that I could provide for my daughters, it was evidence that love, combined with determination and hard work, could overcome any limitation others tried to impose. Emma and Sophie would grow up knowing that their father had fought for them, built something extraordinary for them, and never once doubted their worth. Standing in our beautiful foyer, listening to the sounds of my daughters getting ready for bed in their perfect rooms, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong and everything to do with proving something right, that families built on love and mutual respect could weather any storm and emerge stronger. The tiny apartment where this story began was just the starting point. This house, this life, this unshakable bond with my daughters, this was home.